We've got 4 panelists joining us this afternoon to talk about windows, and I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves and a little bit about their project and sort of, I guess, why they're here today. We've got about 2 minutes each for each one of these presentations, and then we're going to launch straight into the Q&A. So by all means, for everyone out there, type your questions into the Q&A chat box, and we'll, well, hopefully answer all your questions we can about Windows in less than 45 minutes, which is, of course, a really easy task that we'll succeed in wonderfully. So first of all, Marie, could you please tell us a bit about you and your house?
Husband and I live in that. I designed about 5 years ago now, and I'm a big fan of a lot of windows, as you can see in the middle photo at the top there. And in fact, my business now is Planet Architecture, has been for many years, but it used to be House of Light until too many people thought I was selling some light fittings, so I changed it. But anyway, this house is in Melbourne, so we have to contend with both, you know, cold weather and hot weather. So windows play an extremely important role, as well as, you know, insulation. The insulation in the roof is an R6. Everything is sealed as much as is possible. Good insulation in the walls as well. We've got hydronic heating in the floor, which is extremely comfortable. And it sits above an insulated screed, which also makes sure that you don't have any heat traveling into your footings or into the ground. What else can I tell you? Andy, could I add some more, do you think?
Sorry?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm in the 2 minutes or if I can add a few more things.
Yeah, a couple more things, but...
yeah, so windows play a really big role, as well as orientation. I suppose we're going to talk about all of that anyway. This house has got a heat pump for domestic hot water and a gas boiler for the hydronic system, which, you know, next house around, we will use a heat pump for that as well. It's probably all I can say in a nutshell.
Fair enough. Thanks very much indeed, Marie. Now, Brian from the wonderful world of Western Australia. Brian, are you there?
Can you hear me, guys?
We can now.
Hey, how are you? My name is Brian from iSmart Building Group. Unfortunately, the owner of this house is unavailable today. His name is Dennis and his partner Wendy. Dennis actually works for me. This house is built to passive house standards. So all the houses we build are timber frame, highly insulated, airtight, high performance windows, thermal bridge free construction. For those that don't know what passive house is about. This particular house is 265 square meters, including an undercroft 2-car garage. It's got a 2nd story pop-up, predominantly long side facing north. Conservative with windows, but while you look at the front of the house, you wouldn't think so. But it actually is. It's quite conservative. It's only 22% window to floor area in windows. It took about 6 months to build, about 4 months to design. The air tightness result on this is a 1.4 air exchanges per hour. Our insulations are R3 in the external walls to the east, south and west. The north has an R5.4. Insulation to the ceilings, raking ceilings are all R5. Ventilated roof spaces are all R6. Internal walls are 90mm timber stud frame with an R2.5 acoustic bats. It has 3,000 litre rainwater harvesting system, which is hooked directly into the hot water heater for best use of water, which is what we can consider it to be. It also has provision for grey water, and it's got provision for all of that. If he increases the rainwater harvesting, it can be put into the laundry and the toilets if he so wishes. But at the moment, because we don't get that much rain, we think hot water is best used for that. U values in all the windows are between 1.4 and 1.6, depending on the size of the window. How am I doing on time? Gone over or good? Okay. So other than that, it's got native plants. It's in a sustainable estate. So all the houses in here are reviewed by an estate architect. So there's quite a bit of adherence that we need to go through. Yeah, so if you have any other questions, feel free to ask.
I'm sure there'll be at least one other question for you, Brian, possibly 300. Thanks for that brief intro. Next up is Graeme Hunt, who's in the wonderful inner west of Sydney. And I believe this is your own house, Graeme.
Yes, Andy, that's right. We renovated it last year. Being in the inner west, it's a small terrace, single story. It's in a heritage conservation area, which sort of limited what we could do. And we're also under the flight path, which impacted on the windows. The house faces east and west, and the existing design didn't have any north-facing windows, which are crucial in terms of passive solar design. So we looked for any opportunity to get some in. We've added a new room, which I'm sitting in, and you can see behind me on my left is we finally got a large north-facing window. We do have a west-facing window in this room, but we've got an awning on that. We've fitted them with blinds, which we've put ceiling trim on it. In the rest of the house, in the stairwell and lower levels, we've added more windows to bring more light and ventilation into the lower level, which was quite dark. Our first choice would have been double glazed windows in timber frames, but because of the aircraft noise acoustic requirements, the better solution was single glazing, low E with acoustic interlayer. If we went to double glazing, we would have had to go to what's called secondary glazing, which is basically two windows separated by a large air gap of about 100 to 150 millimetres. They then become awkward windows to operate. They're quite expensive, and trying to fit them into a thin, lightweight wall is also a problem because they're about 250 to 300 millimetres thick. So we opted just for the single glazing low E, but then we looked at using blinds and honeycomb blinds and sealing to try and replicate a double glazed effect.
Cool, there's a whole bunch of questions are going to spin out of that one. I can see that for now. And finally, our fourth panelist is Anneleise, who's coming to us from Exeter.
Yeah, so our house is actually based in Wollongong. So it's a post-war era brick veneer home. It was built around 1945. So I'm a practicing building designer, and I'm also studying a PhD at the University of Wollongong at the Sustainable Building Research Centre. So my partner's also a builder. So this was kind of our first project where we got to kind of test the theory and everything we'd learnt to kind of see if, if solar passive design and everything was as cracked up as everyone says it. So this house had a rear extension on the back, so we knocked that off and we built this solar passive extension. So as you can see from the photos, really lots of northern windows, and they're all double glazed. So all the windows are double glazed, except we allowed for two louvers on each side to kind of improve our cross ventilation. We're really lucky being close to the coast that most afternoons in summer we can open them up and purge the house really quickly. We also used software to make sure that our eaves were optimized so that we got as much sun in as we could in winter to hit that concrete slab, and we've got a reverse brick veneer wall that gets heated up. But then in summer, it excludes pretty much all of the sun across the day. We also do a few things with our construction methods that are probably above and beyond what you'd expect in a normal home. So we actually insulated between the window and the window frame. So we put insulation in there. We also put backing rod, which is just like a foam, like a round diameter foam thing. You put that in there, and then we ran caulking or silicone around. So the reasons we did that is it kind of helped with our thermal break. So we got a thermal camera and we checked to make sure that normally where you would get all those thermal breaks around the window, that we've kind of mitigated that as much as possible. And with the caulking as well, it just helps with that air infiltration that you might normally find through those areas. So we've been living here for about a year, and we've been monitoring the temperatures between the old part of the house and the new part. And it's just been fascinating to see, especially in winter, So even though we're in a pretty temperate area in Wollongong, the old part of the house or the existing dwelling gets to about 13 degrees maximum most days in winter. And the extension nearly every day is 22, 23 degrees consistently, no matter how cold it is outside. And most of this has been pretty much due to kind of the design phase and where we put our windows and in relation to the thermal mass. So it's been fascinating to see how well it's performed, but not a whole lot of cost. So we didn't splurge on really special windows or anything. It was just what we did in the design phase to maximize all of that without really kind of bumping up the costs too much.
Cool, thanks for that, Anneleise. We've got a swag of questions already, but obviously, being the MC, I get to choose what we do next. Anneleise, just because you finished up there, you said you didn't splurge heaps on lots of bits, but you on window-related things, but you did do double glazing. So what type of frames have you got in there,
Yep,
and how do they perform in comparison to the glass itself?
Yeah, so they're just aluminium frames. We've got quite big windows, so the portion of frame to glazing is relatively low, so it does help. And the other thing is, being in Wollongong, we actually had most window companies try and talk us out of double glazing, which was pretty disappointing. So we've pushed for it. But so yeah, we spent the money on the double glazing and the coatings where we thought was necessary. So we've got the coatings on the louvers to kind of help because they're only single glaze. But yeah, we didn't really have a big budget, so we were kind of thought the double glazing was something that was important, so we really up-spec'd that. But apart from that, we didn't really do anything that special with our window selection.
Okay, fair enough. And then Graeme, to you, you obviously, with your long background in doing these things, have a lot of experience in houses with double glazing. We've had a few questions about the benefits of honeycomb blinds as an alternative to them. You've obviously used single glazing in parts of your house because you kind of had to. But you've used blinds. You've got deep experience with double glazed windows in houses as well. How do you think they really go? Is good single glazing and blinds as good as double, or is it what you do when you really can't do double?
Well, it depends. It depends on the system you're comparing it to and on the frame, because the performance of frames can affect the overall performance of windows. So. And the crucial thing with using things like honeycomb blinds is sealing the edges, either selecting them. There's ones available now that don't have chain rollers. You can just pull them up and down, so you can fit them tightly into the reveal or within the frame depth of the window. If that's not possible, if the window's not deep enough, you need to make sure that the blind is wider than the window, and then you still need to trim and seal the edge with either a bit of timber trim or aluminium angle. So what you're trying to do is create an air gap. Now, that air gap will never seal quite as well as a double glazed window unit because that has a vacuum seal in it. So as I said before, we're only trying to replicate double glazing. What can achieve a comparable performance is use of heavy drapes with a pelmet, where the drapes are wider than the window and perhaps go down right to the floor. But that's quite an expense. And you may find it's probably more cost effective to just put in a double glazed window. They are getting much cheaper all the time.
Yeah. In my experience, yeah, window coverings can often cost more than the window themselves.
Yeah, sure.
Marie, you wanted to chime in there? You're on mute, which is...
Yes, what I wanted to say is often I hear people say, oh, you know, we can use double glazing, which as Anneleise mentioned, often is discouraged because, you know, a lot of builders are used to just getting the single glazing and everyone's conditioned to believe it's enough in most cases, and let's not worry about the cost of double glazing. I think it's actually quite essential because even though you might have some blinds, who wants to have blinds down during the day? Because, you know, here in Melbourne, for example, we might have, you know, a crisp winter day at 6 degrees where definitely the blinds could be helpful. Doesn't mean that we want to live in a dark house. In fact, it could be quite crisp and sunny. So we do want the sun in instead. So on those days where your heat loss could be very significant, we want to make sure that, you know, our windows really can perform well.
Now, Brian, you're on the other side of the country, but you're not climatically a world apart from, well, the three of us who are in New South Wales at least. Do you have the similar battles with people trying to discourage or get away from using double glazing in houses?
Yes and no. So we're at the top end because we build passive house only. So most of the clients that come to us already understand the benefits of double glazing and thermally broken frames, especially high performance glass. So we have less of a battle. But when we look at the mainstream industry and volume builders, yes, 100%. They will tell you every day of the week that you don't need it in this climate. Now, while people, I don't want to step on toes, but while people say, yes, curtains are a solution, yes, they are to a certain extent. Radiation still comes in, you still have convection, that room will still heat up. Over time, it will still heat up. So while it may be a short-term solution for the problem that's there, the problem is still there. So in my opinion, just my opinion, the products are out there. While they're not always affordable, my opinion, because I'm pushed towards passive, is that if there's products out there that already are a solution to this, then there was originally a problem. Otherwise, this solution wouldn't be here. So while we get heat gain, in the winter, it might be okay because you want that heat gain. But during the summer, which we experience in Perth, heat gain, we do not want it. It's extremely, it's detrimental to the performance of the home. So we always look at performance. When we're talking about windows, we always look at performance data. So what is the U value of that frame? And what is the U value of that glass? For us, that's the key, most important item when you talk about windows. Performance data tells you how that product will perform. So if you have a U value, like average U value single glazing aluminium windows is anywhere from 5.6 to 10, depending on what you're using. If you look at a double glazed UPVC window, even like pretty standard double glazed with argon filled, not air filled, but argon filled, your U values are always below 2. A bad one is 1.9. The really good ones are 0.6 up to 0.9. The average is 1.4 to 1.6. That's kind of the average where you'd be in the ballpark. So when we talk about that, it's you kind of have to put one argument against the other. It's kind of hard. But yes, I will agree with you. Volume builders will tell you that you do not require it.
You touched on there about cost effectiveness as well, and with as part of Sustainable House Day in a week or so, we've got a special session on a Monday evening about delivering affordable high performance homes.
Yes.
Brian, do you want to talk briefly about the window frames that you are using in most of your projects? Because I've got a feeling you're kind of going back to the same answers each time, and then maybe to one of the others on the panel, or everyone on the panel, to comment about, I guess, the differences between the frames that they've used in the past and sort of the pros and cons, especially in relation to cost.
Yep. So for us, being in WA, we're wait a while. So we were kind of pigeonholed. We use Comerling C70 Gold and Profine so that's for the windows, and for the doors, it's Profine Profile. We use that
UPVC, yes?
UPVC, yeah. Now, when an aluminium or an alu clad system or a timber system comes in that's affordable, I will jump at the chance, 100%. But unfortunately, it's not available right now. So if we want to be competitive in the market, this is what we use right now. And there are U values of 1.4 to 1.6. So when we talk about value, if we forget about single glazing aluminium frames, if we go what most of the volume builders are calling double glazing now in an aluminium frame, air filled, we're just over twice the price. Just over twice the price. So for me, you've almost 4 times the performance, but you're paying twice the price. I don't know. It's an argument that will go over and back, especially when it comes to passive solar design. And like passive solar design, when it's done right, it's 100% works every time. There is a certain amount of user interface where the user of the home has to work on the home to allow that home to work correctly. But again, we deal with passive house, so it's set and forget. There's no user required, if you know what I mean. The performance is there.
Anneleise, in particular, you started talking about how the design of your windows you'd made some decisions on framing based on that. Do you want to talk about how you use that to, I guess, make windows more cost effective while still having the bang for the buck?
For my own experience or with other clients?
Oh, whichever's useful to the
622
people who are listening.
So Well, I definitely find, especially with clients, that it's a battle just to get them to consider anything other than the cheapest window option. So most of the time I'll just start by kind of pushing them into, up-speccing their windows in certain areas. So, their living spaces and that. And if I can get them to go double glaze there, I know I'm winning. Especially, like I said, where I live, there just is some prejudice against them and that we don't need them. And I think sometimes doing things like bringing clients into a place like ours and showing them the benefits of different window types and that just because you live in a temperate zone that, double glazing or low E or any of those types of coatings, they can still be very beneficial.
Fair enough. And Graeme and Marie?
I'd agree with Brian that in terms of cost effectiveness for a very good performing window system, the UPVC is sort of winning hands down. Several reasons. One is the systems are meant for double glazing. So double glazing is generally a standard supply item for them. And they seal really well. They're a long-term technology from Europe. There's obviously some environmental concerns about using UPVC, but if you're careful with who you choose, it's sort of a debate we go through a lot. That you can get quite high performing timber windows, and from an environmental point of view, that's a much better product. But over time, the maintenance of painting them or sealing them has an environmental impact. And going further on to Brian's point, if you want to go to really high performing aluminium windows, you've got to go to the thermal break windows, which even add a larger cost premium. We have designed some new houses recently where we're using composite windows, which is the aluminium external and then timber internal. So that's a better performing frame.
Yeah, Alu-clad, they're a good product.
Yeah. I would agree that the composite windows are the bee's knees, and if the budget is there for them, they are really fantastic because they marry the best of both worlds. You get the insulation of timber and the no maintenance of the aluminium. My favourite windows remain the timber windows. I've been using a number of times now the aluminium windows, not necessarily thermally broken, and I find that particularly the ones that are in a dark anodized color, they tend to be so hot that the heat gets transferred inside. The other thing is I find the thermally broken ones often, depending on the manufacturer, but they're quite limited in the number of operations and type of windows that they have. So they can be, and they're also very expensive, in fact more expensive than the timber windows. And, they compared to timber windows, they actually don't insulate quite as well either. So timber windows, for many years, I used to leave them with just a stain or, a clear coating. But that is a lot of maintenance. Now, when people want the look of timber, which is, of course, an appearance that a lot of people like, we tend to put a coating inside, a clear coating or a stain. But on the outside, we paint them a timber color. And you wouldn't know from the street that it actually looks painted, that it is painted as opposed to just being stained. So you get the best of both worlds because although there is embodied energy in the paint, it really is something you only need to do maybe every 15 years. So it's no big deal. And with just a little word about PVC, I'm originally from France myself, and it's extremely common over there, of course. That's pretty much all there is. I've been very hesitant to use it here, especially after I heard a manufacturer or actually a distributor of European windows telling me, I'm only happy to distribute the light colored ones because there is, in spite of, those German manufacturers saying we have a special mix for Australia to make sure it will withstand the UV. He went there and he didn't find that the mix was anything different. And he doesn't trust those windows to behave properly with the amount of UV we've got here. So he only uses the, very light colored ones.
Was that a recent comment? Because I've heard that and seen that written a lot, but I've had a lot of reassurance from a lot of people I trust.
Yeah, no, and usually you do get reassurance. But this one, you know, being a distributor, he was German himself. He said doesn't trust them. It was probably a couple of years ago.
Okay, fair enough. All right, contradicts what I've been told by the others. Look, from our own personal experience, we found that the timber aluminium composite are really, really awesome windows. Their air tightness is fantastic, which is often a challenge with a lot of locally made almost anythings. And we found that with the right design parameters, we can actually keep the cost to be about the same as half decent local aluminium double glazed windows. So kind of like Anneleise was saying before, if you can minimize the frame and maximize the glass area, then you actually can get some fairly good cost effective outcomes. So we kind of have this mantra of frame bad, glass good. It doesn't mean you overglaze your houses. We've had an absolute a large number of questions about retrofitting windows to make existing windows better. Has anybody got any specific experiences they'd like to share about the good, the bad, and the ugly of fixing existing windows?
I would say if they are the double hung type, I don't know that there is a lot of hope with those. You know, they are notoriously hard to seal, and I'm yet to find a way to seal them effectively. So in this case, it might be a good idea to replace them altogether. I think Graeme was mentioning the secondary glazing, or you know, you can actually retrofit a secondary sheet of either glass or plexiglass if there is enough rebate. So that's always the key question. Can we is the frame deep enough that you can actually fit this secondary glazing? And otherwise, you can always insulate, you know, around the window if you can. Retrofit some good rubber seals. You know, a number of things can be done, and there are people who actually specialize in that. Whether you get the same result as a new window that is well sealed and double glazed, you have to do a cost comparison as well, because by the time you retrofit all these to the window, it's not necessarily very cheap either.
Cool. Does anyone else want to chime in on the retrofit? Well, I mean, we've got some experience ourselves, which which sort of is similar to Marie's in that we have retrofitted double glazing into double hung windows. It's gone pretty well. It's not necessarily as good as a new window. I'd argue it can be as good as a new double hung window. I feel that it's more the nature of double hungs that's the issue than the retrofit itself. But you know, they're still significantly better than they were before. There's some fairly awesome tilt turn simulated double hung windows that we've recently specified on a job, which look like the double hung. They're great for heritage conservation areas. So they look like a double hung. The top pane is fixed and the bottom pane is actually a tilt turn window. They're not the cheapest windows on earth, but they solve a whole bunch of problems, and the acoustics are fantastic as well. So, sorry, did anyone else want to chime in on retrofitting? It seems to be a topic of huge interest in the Q&A.
Andy, I was just going to add one option is the magnetite product, which Marie referred to, which is the acrylic panel on a magnetic strip, which can be fitted onto existing window frames. It can look a bit clunky, so it's a matter of detailing it well, but it does improve things. I was in a house the other day where the owners had fitted themselves into 2 front bedrooms, and they said that the house had improved significantly in terms of comfort in winter.
Yep, fair enough. I've actually got that in my own house here in the inner west, and it's good for a thermal, but it's especially good for the acoustics, and it keeps the drunk noise out on Saturday nights when people walk past to a fairly good degree. But I guess the key thing to mention with those sort of secondary glazing solutions is you've got to ensure you've still got a viable ventilation strategy for the room. Depending on how you install those secondary glazing, if you've got to remove the whole panel to be able to open the window, you need to question whether that's actually going to happen from an air quality point of view. And in our case, we put in HRVs because it was easier. But yeah, just I guess maybe we should move on at that point to talk about the benefits of windows in terms of actual indoor air quality and natural ventilation. Anneleise, there's a few people asking about your louvers. A few questions about the type of the coatings that were on the glass in particular, but also I guess just some general comments on how effective you find them to be. And I guess knowing what you know about building performance and double glazing versus single glazing and airtightness and all those things, would you still put in louvers in the places you did, or would you go to a different solution if you had your time again?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I wouldn't change them. I think the louvers do a fantastic job, just where they're orientated and the way that they pull the breezes in. I wouldn't change them. The other thing is, because we live so close to the coast, fly screens are really important. So we wanted something that we could open up and get a lot of ventilation and opening area while still kind of stopping the bugs. So I think they're brilliant. They're not massive compared to the rest of the glazing, so they will affect our performance slightly, but because of the thermal mass and everything else that's happening in the house, it doesn't seem to have as much of an impact as you might think. The only thing I probably would have done in hindsight is in our top windows, put one set of louvers up there, or another type, potentially an awning window or something up there to help to purge the heat from the top. We just noticed that some of that heat rises and holds. So that was kind of a toss up whether we put something up there that was single glazed or kind of kept the double glazing. But I think louvers are fine. They're definitely getting better as far as how well they seal. I know historically they've been quite bad for their air tightness. I know they're working towards making them better. I noticed with ours, they're not as great against noise and all those other things, but they are just so practical to use, especially for areas that are really hard to reach as well. So I think they're good as long as they're done in consideration to the rest of the glazing, and not having too many of them.
Okay, fantastic. Look, we've got about 10 minutes to go. We've got, there's an obscene number of questions that are on the Q&A, and I've tried to sort of summarize them as best as I can. But what I thought I might do is ask each of you to spend a moment or two, I guess, on, if you had 90 seconds, which is about what you'll get, to advise people on what they should or shouldn't be doing if they're considering doing work to their home in relation to windows specifically. What would you say? What would you say to them? And what are the key points that you would make, knowing all the things you know, gleaned from all the experiences you've got over the years you've been doing this stuff? So do you want to start with Marie, because you were top of my list to start with?
I was actually just writing a couple of things that I thought would be worth mentioning. First is this particular house that I'm in now, that is on the Sustainable House, their website, has got two significant windows upstairs that face west. And it was almost an experiment to see how bad it is. It's actually very bad, even though they are double glazed like everything else, and they also have the low E coating, which I find is a little bit disappointing. We even added, in fact, another film, like a special solar film, but I didn't want to cut too much light from that, enters the rooms either. So all in all, I would say that you cannot count on films or low E to fix an exposure or an orientation that is not right. You can't count, in fact, on anything in the summer, because double glazing is not going to resist radiant heat. It resists heat loss, but when it comes to radiant heat can go through glass, and it will go through two panes of glass. So key is, low E is good. It will improve your performance, but it will be disappointing if you're really counting on that. Orientation is key. Make sure your biggest windows are on the north side, and small windows on the south side for cross ventilation. And, if you can get away with having no windows east and west, that's fine. As far as passive solid design, that's no big deal. There might be other issues, such as, you might have great views, you might need to, have a window to the street or what have you. But as far as, if you have a chance, for example, if you need to replace a window, how about, and it faces, west, how about, and you have a chance to make it a north-facing window, remove that one, put the new window on the north side. So orientation is key, is my point.
Cool, alrighty. Brian, over to you. About 90 seconds or so would be awesome.
Okay, so my advice would be function and form. they go hand in hand. Don't always choose form over function. Function is an extremely important part of the process when designing your home. When we talk about function, we talk about the performance of the windows. U values, look for U values if you can afford it, thermally broken. They're the two major pieces of advice I would give. When we talk about north, south, east and west orientation, yes, it's extremely important, extremely important. If you have a designer who puts a big, large glazing section facing north or facing west with no shading, you got to question what that designer is doing. You really do. You got to pay attention. If there's a large area, it should be shaded. If they're not talking to you about winter and summer solstice and changing and thermal heat gains into the building, then question their performance themselves. Performance of the windows is extremely important, and not just the glazing, the frames also. U values, I keep going back to it. U values is your performance. That'll do me.
Do your designers have U values of their own?
Whatever product we're using, we provide that information. Yes.
I meant the humans. Sorry, that was my version, my version of humour. Graeme, over to you. Can you distill 30 odd years worth of knowledge into 90 seconds?
I'll try. Well, I'll echo both what Marie and Brian have said. One thing is we're in a heating climate, and you know, we still tend a lot to put overglaze. People like to have views or look out onto the yard, and so making sure the windows aren't too big. You can often highlight a view much better with a smaller window than a huge window, as long as it's carefully placed. External shading is very important and going to become more important, and flexible shading, adjustable shading, because we're finding now in the shoulder seasons, we're getting 30 plus degree days this time of year. And if you've got a fixed eave, it may not be sufficient. So having awnings that you can adjust to suit the seasons is important, but also getting, as Brian's saying, good high performing windows. There's a website, the WERS rating system, which rates all the windows. You can go on there and search for the performance values for all the different windows.
Cool. And then finally, Anneleise, over to you.
Yeah, I think everyone's already been pretty bang on with all the comments. I guess the other thing that I would also consider is when you're picking your windows, also think about what else it might be able to do. So if you live in the city or near a busy road, you can pick windows that are going to help with your noise control. And for us, especially with the older part of the house where we are now, just the noise is horrendous. So just something to think about as well, that certain windows can perform a lot better if you are getting a lot of noise pollution. The other thing is, if you're unsure, if you're doing quite a big project, even if it's a retrofit, it might be worth getting a NatHearst assessor or a designer or someone who has access to some good modelling to actually optimise all of your window sizes and the types and that, so you can save money where you don't need to up spec and really kind of focus on those areas that are going to make the biggest difference.
Cool, thanks very much indeed. There's a myriad of things that I'd love to say, but we don't have the 3 hours it'd take me to get through it. But I guess I would like to echo Annelise's point there about getting some form of formal assessment done. Science is really great. It tends to be really consistent and give really good advice. It's not always what you want to hear, but you normally do need to hear it. So do spend the time and energy and the money on getting things modelled beforehand. It will reap absolute buckets later on. For most people renovating homes, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars normally, and a few $1,000 to get the right outcome is an absolute bargain. There's many other things I'd like to add to the conversation, but we really just don't have the time this afternoon. I would like to thank the 4 panelists this afternoon for giving up their Sunday afternoon to do this. And I'd like to give the biggest heartfelt thanks of all to Renew for making it happen. Sustainable House Day has been a mainstay for, what, over a decade now. And what they've pulled off this year is truly amazing. So yeah, I'm deeply grateful to everything that everyone at Renew has done. Jess and Anna and all the other people behind the scenes, most of whom I don't even know because there's so many of them. It's a huge effort. So thank you, Renew. Thank you, panelists. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the sessions.